Hi everyone, my name's Zoe. I'll be moderating today's webinar. A couple quick notes before we get started. Please take a moment to locate the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. There's a little Zoom menu bar and it's right in the middle of there. Throughout the webinar, feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A. We'll have time to answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And then we'll also put out a couple polls throughout the presentation and would love to have your participation in those. So we'll launch that first poll now while everyone's hopping on. So we want to know, how are you processing your medical waste today? There's a few different options for you to choose from. Also, if you choose, or if you have anything else you want to share just about your answer too, feel free to throw that in the chat as well. And if you're just hopping on, we have a poll up on the screen. If you'd like to answer, go ahead and do so, and we'll give it everyone just another little bit here, and we'll share that, and we'll get rolling. All right, I think let's share those. We'll share the results from the poll.
Looks like a few autoclaves, a lot of third party, right?
Expected.
Expected. That's right. So yeah, it's actually 88% sending everything off to a third party, 20% have their own autoclave. So
A little
cool.
overlap.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for participating in that, and thanks Zoe for that nice introduction. I'm Seth. I'm the sales and marketing director for Clean Waste Systems.
And I'm Kelly Perkle. I'm the CEO.
And today we're going to talk about medical waste. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that this isn't a topic of conversation that a lot of you love to talk about. And that's because medical waste is dirty, it's dangerous, it's expensive, and it's not the most fun thing to talk about. So it presents a lot of challenges and problems for hospitals. Like globally, hospitals are spending more than 6 billion annually just to get rid of medical waste. And that's across, PATH and RMW and Sharps. And it's a hard puzzle to solve too, because you end up with a lot of factors converging on one point. You've got like liability issues and safety concerns and rapidly rising costs. And probably the hardest one to solve is that negative environmental impact. So I want to open with a personal story today. When I was 11 years old, my grandpa had to have his leg amputated. And I still remember the moment I found out about it. My dad had to come to me and tell me that his dad would have to live the rest of his life without a leg. So here's me as, maybe not so emotionally intelligent 11-year-old boy, after my dad tells me this big news. And I take a couple seconds to kind of process it. And I come back to him with one question. I asked him one question. I said, what did they do with the leg? And so to my dad's credit, though, he had the answer. He said they incinerate it. And he's right. Even today, right around 70% of all medical waste gets incinerated. That's across all types of medical waste, but it's right around 70% of it gets lit up. So before we go any further, I'd like us all to agree on a couple simple things. One, burning garbage is bad. Like in general, if you can avoid burning garbage, you should try to avoid burning garbage. Now, I understand that there's some waste that does require incineration, but in general, we're burning a lot more than we need to, and it's just not sustainable. And then thing two, you can't just take a leg to a landfill. Like something has to happen with potentially dangerous biohazardous waste in order to keep everybody safe. So those are the 2 points I'd like us all to agree on. One, burning garbage is bad, but you can't just take a leg to a landfill. And that's actually what I wanted to title the webinar today, but Kelly wouldn't let that fly.
I think we've made a better selection, Seth, but thank you. The personal story really does help kind of bring things home. So let's go over a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. 3 steps to greening your red bag. So number 1, own your process, documentation and training. Number 2, take control of your waste streams. your responsibility for your waste, and how to get your arms around the operations and the cost containment. And then number 3, implement safe and sustainable solutions. Heat always presents a risk, and we will also touch on how to reduce single-use plastics. So the first step, own your own process. What does that mean? Like any operation at your hospital, if you want to make waste management consistent and repeatable, you have to document the process. And that starts at the point of segregation. What waste goes where? Often this happens in the patient room, and ensuring that the right waste goes into the right container isn't easy. How are the different waste streams transported through the hospital? How waste is stored, packed, processed, and then using a third party, how it leaves the building. Where does it go? What happens to it? And what third party vendors are involved? And then, of course, how much are you paying for your different waste streams? And that seems straightforward, but very often we find that hospitals have a hard time answering that question. And after everything has been documented, you need to get your entire staff on the same page with some training. And many of you know that we are seeing regulatory enforcement increasing. And the last thing you want are fines because of your RMW going into your bulk waste. Or another thing we're seeing a lot of right now to avoid that is paying for sorting and audits after the fact, which gets incredibly expensive and is still imperfect. So that training starts in the patient rooms because that's the point of segregation, and that's really the most critical step to get right. And this means that all of your caregivers, nursing assistants, cleaning staff, anyone who might be in a position to decide where to toss waste. And this happens tens of thousands of times, if not more, every day in your facility. And then when you follow each waste stream down that path until the waste is out of the building, involving EVS and facilities staff, anyone who might be responsible for direct handling or even coordinating what happens with the waste. So training can't just be one group or a one-time thing. Your employees are always moving, you're hiring, people are transferring, you've got travelers, cycling agency personnel in and out. The team isn't static, and people don't retain everything from one training. So whatever you do, the training needs to be recurring and it needs to be scheduled.
And Kelly too, I know one hospital that's actually running all of their patient room waste through a medical waste processing system because they just don't believe that they can train their way out of these regulatory challenges that they're facing.
Yep, for sure. And then finally, do your own research on what is happening to your waste. Your process doesn't end with when it leaves your building. So part of your responsibility includes where you choose to send your waste, and especially if you're not processing on site. Where are they actually taking it? We talked to one hospital that found out their waste hauler was taking each truck of RMW over 400 miles away, and the hospital was paying for it. And 400 miles is a lot of time and distance for something to potentially go wrong, and a lot of increased emissions from all that hauling. How is your waste being processed? Is it being incinerated or autoclaved or something else? Is the waste being shredded or completely destroyed, or are they just autoclaving it and then hauling it to a landfill, potentially with objects that could have labels or other sensitive patient information on them? And then what's the environmental impact of the treatment method that your processor is using?
Yeah, Kelly, I think that part's really important, right? Like, if the processor that you've selected is running all your RMW through an incinerator, that means that you, as the hospital, are choosing to incinerate your waste by sending it to that vendor. Like, you always have a choice.
Absolutely. And if you have sustainability goals, you're not going to be able to address them sufficiently if you're not addressing how you're processing your waste. And then finally, how much are you actually paying and what are you paying for? And I really encourage you to do some invoice digging. Not always processors are the same, but a lot of the invoices I have looked at are a mess. There are administrative fees and fuel surcharges, handling and transport fees, waste fees, new fees popping up all the time. So ask the tough questions and know where your money is going, what you're actually paying for, and is it reasonable? And by understanding what you're paying for each waste stream in total, it'll be a lot easier for you to identify where you need to focus your efforts if you want to reduce those costs. And when you look at this, I can't stress it enough, you need to look at the full invoice with all of those charges and fees. Because if you ask for only one, for example, for what am I paying for RMW processing, you probably will only receive those specific charges for your RMW processing and not necessarily all of those other associated fees for manifests and fuel surcharges and all of that. So it's really important to look closely at the complete payments that you're making. Most hospitals we work with really don't realize how much they're paying until we start to help them dig in.
All right. So once you have everything documented, you have a solid training system and you understand what's actually, going on with your waste streams once they leave your facility. The next level up, if you want to green the red bag, reduce your liability risk and cut those operating costs, is to take more control of your waste streams. So if you're outsourcing your waste like more than 80% of you, your process probably looks something like this, right? You start by sorting the waste, and Kelly talked about this in training. That waste segregation is probably the most critical step for compliance. Your staff has to make sure that the waste goes in the right color bins. And then you have to store it, right? You need space, you need continuous refrigeration, you might need security. And then you have to coordinate pickup times with your vendors. And at this point, you might have already touched the waste, 5 or 6 or 7 times, and you need to make sure that waste is, where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, so it can get on the truck. And then you have to pay for it. You have next to no cost controls or predictability. Whatever you're paying now, you're probably going to be paying a whole lot more, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And then you just have to kind of hope that it's all being handled appropriately. Because even after your waste drives away on that magic truck, like if a vial with patient information makes it to a landfill, or if waste goes falling out of the back of a truck somewhere, that liability is always going to fall back to you. And if the vendor you choose is incinerating waste, as we talked about before, that's your choice as the hospital to essentially burn your garbage. So reliance on those third parties is always going to lead to risk, among other things. And so that's why we say that next step to greening the red bag is taking more control. So, you as the hospital are responsible for that waste cradle to grave. So, even after you've done your research and understood, what your vendor says they're going to do with the waste, you really can't know what happens with that waste after it gets on the magic truck, right? I mean, just think about everything that can go wrong. I mean, you're sending off a truck full of potential liability issues, and most of the time it works out fine. But when it goes wrong, it can go really wrong.
And unfortunately, when things go wrong, it's the hospital that ends up on the front page
Yeah,
of the paper.
yeah. It's not the no name waste processing company. It's the headline grabbing hospital's name. So and if everything goes off without a hitch, I mean best case scenario is that almost certainly that waste is either going to get incinerated or autoclaved. So in general, it's best to bring waste processing in-house when possible. So cut out as much of that magic truck as you can, and there's actually plenty of options out there. Depending on the size of your hospital, but get something that can decontaminate your waste. There's autoclaves and microwaves and ozone systems. Anything is really better than outsourcing. And yes, it takes up some space, but you're already making space to store all that waste and stage it, between magic truck visits, and like your personnel periodically has to operate a system to process the waste. But today your personnel is storing waste and coordinating with third-party vendors and dealing with invoice issues. So it largely ends up being a reallocation of space and staff hours. And if oh, but hey, Seth, I'm too small for in-house treatment. Like you might be surprised at what options are out there. We offer a higher capacity waste processing system for mid to large size hospitals. But I mean, I know of one company that makes a system that's about the size of like a Xerox machine. And I know another company that makes a desktop waste processing system that's about the size of a microwave. So you do have options out there. So step 2 for greening the red bag is take control of your waste streams, at least as much as possible.
And after you've made a commitment to bring at least some of your processing on site, the third step to greening the red bag is rolling out safe and sustainable solutions. So we want to pause here to just get a temperature check on sustainability from everyone.
Ooh. How committed is your organization to environmental sustainability? So this is our second and last poll. We'll give you guys a minute.
I'm sure everyone's had a chance to make a quick selection by now.
Yeah,
Pull up the results.
Zoe, can you hit it? Ooh, mixed bag.
No one's alone. Looks like the majority, just over 50%, we have goals, but I don't know how much we're actually doing. And then we've got about a third with a detailed, aggressive sustainability action plan. That's awesome. And then a minority, we rarely talk about environmental sustainability, which we do see a fair amount of that across the market as well. So pretty consistent with what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a bit about heat-based systems, but we want to just cover a little bit about what we think is actually wrong with that for processing. So autoclaves are expensive to run. They require a lot of electricity and water to produce the steam. And they leave you with nasty effluent output. They're terrible to work around. I don't know if you've ever been near one, but they stink really bad. And if you're not careful, they can stink up your whole hospital. And it's tough to retain staff when they're expected to work in those kinds of conditions day in and day out. And then incinerators are unbelievably expensive to install. They're highly regulated in most states. We're seeing a lot of them being decommissioned more and more. They're dirty and they're expensive to maintain, and you're pumping emissions into the atmosphere, which we already talked about. It doesn't feel great for the planet. And I honestly kind of worry about health systems that are running their own incinerators or contributing to big incinerators right now. I worry that it kind of feels like a PR nightmare waiting to happen. So we are excited to tell you about some other solutions. You need a solution that doesn't involve heat, and you need a solution that completely destroys the waste. So the graphic on the right here shows autoclaved waste in the background next to waste that went through a heatless ozone treatment system. We'll get into ozone in just a minute, but for me, the huge difference, what I see in this graphic, is what this waste looks like. The difference is so clear. The autoclave waste remains whole and it's clearly recognizable as medical waste. I know how badly it probably stinks, and I worry that there are sharps and protected health information in that big file. It's not exactly somewhere I'd feel comfortable walking. And in contrast to that, you've got the shredded and clearly treated waste in the foreground that essentially looks like odorless confetti. And we also know that most of the waste in RMW is plastics. And one of the biggest offenders is sharps containers. And I have to say, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that in my over 20-year healthcare career, I never paused to think about the fact that those sharps containers that you see around your hospital on the wall, they're one-time use. And when your vendor comes to swap out those containers, they take partially full containers and incinerate or autoclave them. And all of that thick walled plastic ends up in the landfill or the incinerator and up in the atmosphere. So instead, a much more environmentally friendly and cost-saving option is to use reusable sharps containers. And we'll tell you more about that in detail in a minute as well. So step 3 to greening the red bag is to use a safe and sustainable processing method, and then ditch those disposable sharps containers.
All right. So when it comes to choosing a processing system, I'd say look at what matters to your hospital and see, which system checks the boxes you want checked. So maybe you care about reducing liability risk. Well, then you're going to want to make sure the system you choose completely destroys the waste. Or maybe you really care about energy use and energy consumption. Well, you might not want an autoclave or a microwave because they're high energy use. Or maybe staffing is a concern, and you want to make sure you're offering a clean working environment for your employees. Well, if that's the case, you probably don't want a heat-based system. Really, all in, ozone checks the boxes. Ozone systems can deliver 6 log kill decontaminating waste. Shredding makes that waste completely unrecognizable, and because it doesn't use heat, nobody's going to get burned, and you aren't left with that nasty odor. On top of all that, ozone systems are very resource efficient. They use very little energy and water, so you're going to see significantly reduced operating costs. And the actual processing of waste generates zero greenhouse gas emissions. So we've talked about ozone a fair amount. So I want to do a quick flyover on how ozone actually kills pathogens. So you start by electrically charging oxygen. And once that oxygen's charged, the molecules split up and bond together again in groups of 3. Now, instead of that O2 oxygen, you have O3 ozone. That ozone naturally seeks out organic matter. It kills pathogens at a cellular level. So those O3 molecules break open holes in cells, and then the cells deteriorate and die, and it only takes seconds. After the whole process is complete, that ozone is converted back into oxygen and it gets released into the outside air. And ozone is used for all kinds of applications. There's like cleaning supplies, water treatment. It's used in the food industry a lot for disinfectants. Odor elimination is a big use for it. But in order to use it for medical waste, you have to have a system that makes it simple. And that's where we at Clean Waste Systems come in. We offer ozone medical waste processing systems. Today we have 4 system sizes. The smallest processes 200 pounds per hour, and the largest processes 2,000 pounds of medical waste per hour. To give you an idea how they work, I'm going to show you that OMW 400 right there. So what you do is you roll that container up onto a platform. A single button push starts the process. That waste gets lifted, weighed, and recorded automatically. And then it gets dumped into a heavy industrial grade shredding system, which breaks down that waste into that fine confetti that we were talking about earlier. And then it gets slowly pushed up with an auger where it's exposed to that concentrated ozone mixed with a very small amount of water. The whole process takes about an hour. And once that shredded waste gets to the end of the auger, it's expelled into a container. It's fully inert, decontaminated, and ready to go to the landfill in the same way you'd haul up, any other trash. The whole it's simple, it's safe, it's sustainable, and it usually costs pennies on the dollar to operate compared to those heat-based systems.
And then we also talked about reusable sharps containers earlier. So here's an example of a system that Clean Waste System has for container reuse, which we call eco sharps. And you can save a ton of money and simplify your process by taking that sharps management in-house. So the way that it works is you swap out all of your disposable containers for reusable ones throughout your hospital. And then once they're full, you bring them down to your waste processing area and you run those containers through a hands-free automatic decanter, which empties the container safely. And then the contents can be processed through our ozone system for treatment that Seth just went through. And the empty containers are run through a wash system to sterilize them so they can be safely brought out back onto the hospital floor. Okay, so to recap, there are 3 big steps to greening the red bag. Number 1, own your process. Number 2, take control of your waste streams. And number 3, implement safe and sustainable solutions. Net, we would love for you to seriously consider bringing your process in-house for all of these reasons and more. And this is the promise that we at Clean Waste Systems can make to you today. If you have an interest in learning more about processing on site, whatever your size or specific needs, we always do a thorough ROI to help our customers see the payback opportunity and the value. So if we are not the right fit for you, we will help refer you to someone that could be a better fit. We just really want to see a shift away from the waste, the way that this waste is handled. And hospitals have that ability to take control of the process and the costs.